The rain fell in thick sheets across the abandoned military installation on Kepler 442b, a world that humanity had colonized nearly 2 centuries ago but had largely forgotten in the great expansion outward. Marcus Chen pulled his weather coat tighter around his shoulders as he walked through the rusted gates of what the old records called Facility 17. He was 34 years old, an engineer by training and an explorer by circumstance, and he had spent the last 3 years following rumors and old data fragments that spoke of something hidden in this place. The facility had been built during the First Contact Wars, that terrible period in human history when humanity discovered it was not alone in the universe and that the universe did not welcome them with open arms. The collective, a loose alliance of 17 different alien species, had looked upon humanity as a disease to be cured, a pest to be exterminated before it could spread beyond its home system. They had been wrong about humanity's willingness to die quietly, and the war that followed had lasted 40 years and claimed billions of lives on both sides. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about that war from his grandfather, a man who had served on the front lines and carried the scars both physical and mental until his dying day. The old man had spoken of ships that could tear through enemy formations like knives through paper, of weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the fury of a dying star. Most people dismissed such stories as the exaggerations of an old soldier, but Marcus had always believed there was truth hidden in those tales. The facility stretched out before him in the gray morning light, a collection of massive hangars and support buildings that had been left to rot when the war ended and the military pulled back to more strategic positions. The planetary government had declared the entire region a restricted zone, citing environmental contamination from old weapon testing, but Marcus had found documents suggesting that the real reason was something else entirely. Something the government did not want anyone to find. He made his way through the outer perimeter, noting the remains of defensive positions and automated gun emplacements that had long since rusted into uselessness. The security systems had failed decades ago, and nature had begun reclaiming what humanity had built. Vines crawled up the sides of buildings, and small animals scurried away at his approach. It was hard to believe that this place had once been one of the most classified military installations in human space. The hangar he was looking for was at the back of the facility, a structure so large that it dwarfed everything around it. The doors were sealed with massive locks that had corroded shut over the years, but Marcus had come prepared. He pulled out his cutting tools and began working on the ancient metal, his hands steady despite the excitement building in his chest. Whatever was inside this hangar had been important enough to hide from the entire galaxy. Important enough to wipe from all official records and seal away behind walls of bureaucracy and lies. It took him nearly 3 hours to cut through the locks and force the doors open wide enough for him to squeeze through. The darkness inside was absolute, and he activated the light mounted on his helmet before stepping forward. His boots echoed on the concrete floor as he walked, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness of the space around him. And then, his light fell upon something that made him stop breathing. The ship filled the hangar like a sleeping giant, its hull stretching back into the darkness beyond the reach of his light. It was massive, easily 2 kilometers long from what he could see, and its design was unlike anything in the current fleet. The lines were aggressive, angular in a way that spoke of speed and violence, and the hull was covered in what looked like weapons emplacements and sensor arrays. This was not a ship built for exploration or trade. This was a ship built for war. Marcus walked forward slowly, his hand reaching out to touch the hull. The metal was cold beneath his fingers, but it was not the cold of abandonment. There was something alive about this ship, something waiting. He could feel it in his bones, a humming that seemed to resonate with his very soul. He found the access hatch near the front of the ship, a small door set into the hull that had been designed for maintenance crews. The controls were dark, but when he placed his hand on the panel, something remarkable happened. The ship recognized him. Lights flickered to life along the hull, running in patterns that seemed almost eager, and the hatch slid open with a soft hiss of pressurized air. Marcus stepped inside, and the interior lights activated automatically, revealing a corridor that stretched deep into the heart of the vessel. The walls were covered in displays and control panels, all of them dark except for a few that showed basic status information. The air was stale but breathable, and he realized with a start that the ship had maintained its own atmosphere for over a century. He followed the corridor toward what he assumed was the bridge, passing through compartments filled with equipment he did not recognize. Some of it looked like weapons, massive cannons and missile racks that could deliver enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Other equipment seemed to be more exotic, devices covered in strange symbols that pulsed with a faint inner light. The technology here was advanced, far beyond anything in the current fleet, and Marcus found himself wondering just what the military had been doing during the war. The bridge was at the center of the ship, a vast circular room dominated by a command chair that sat on a raised platform in the middle. Holographic displays surrounded the chair, all of them dormant, and the walls were lined with crew stations that had been designed for a complement of at least 100 officers. But what caught Marcus's attention was the message. It was displayed on the main screen above the command chair, written in simple text that had been waiting for someone to read it for over 100 years. The words were faded but still legible, and Marcus read them aloud, his voice barely above a whisper in the silent ship. To whoever finds this vessel, you are holding in your hands the last hope of humanity. The Wrath of Terra was built in secret during the darkest days of the war, when our enemies pushed us to the brink of extinction. She is the most powerful warship ever constructed by human hands, designed to end wars rather than fight them. The technology inside her hull comes from sources that official history will never acknowledge, breakthroughs that our scientists achieved through sacrifice, and genius that the galaxy will never understand. The collective does not know she exists. No one knows she exists except for the people who built her, and we are all dead now. The war ended before she could be deployed, and the decision was made to hide her away rather than reveal her to a galaxy that had just barely accepted peace. But peace does not last forever. One day, humanity will need the Wrath of Terra again. One day, our enemies will return, or new threats will emerge from the dark between the stars. When that day comes, whoever reads this message must make a choice. You can walk away and leave this ship to sleep for another century, or you can wake her up and prepare for what is coming. Choose wisely. Admiral Sarah Chen, Commander of the Wrath of Terra, year 2287 of the Common Era. Marcus read the message 3 times, his mind struggling to process what he had found. Admiral Sarah Chen. His ancestor. His grandfather had spoken of her sometimes, in hushed tones that suggested reverence and grief. She had been one of the heroes of the war, a tactical genius who had commanded the fleet that held the line at the Battle of Seoul. History recorded that she had died in that battle, going down with her ship in a final act of defiance against the enemy armada. But history, it seemed, had been wrong. He sat down in the command chair, and, the moment he did, the ship came alive around him. Displays flickered to life, showing systems that had been in standby for over a century. The hum he had felt earlier grew stronger, and he realized that it was the ship's power core, a massive fusion reactor that had been keeping the vessel in a state of hibernation all these years. A holographic figure appeared before him, a woman in a naval uniform that had not been worn in over 100 years. She had dark hair and sharp eyes, and there was something in her expression that reminded Marcus of his grandfather. This was Admiral Chen, or at least a recording of her, preserved in the ship's systems for whoever might find her. Welcome aboard the Wrath of Terra, the hologram said, her voice clear despite the age of the recording. If you are seeing this message, then, you have passed the initial security protocols and, the ship has determined that you are of my bloodline. The Wrath was designed to recognize the genetic markers of the Chen family, a failsafe we built in to ensure that she would only be activated by someone we could trust. You are my descendant, and that means you carry my responsibility now. Marcus listened as the hologram explained the history of the ship, the secret program that had built her, and the technology that made her unique. The Wrath of Terra was not just a warship. She was a technological marvel, incorporating breakthroughs that had been achieved during the war and, then, hidden away from a galaxy that was not ready to know what humanity was capable of. The hull was made of a material called quantum steel, an alloy that could absorb and redirect energy attacks with nearly perfect efficiency. The weapons included plasma cannons that could punch through any known shield technology, missile systems that could track targets across light years, and something called a gravity lance, a weapon that could create localized singularities capable of tearing enemy ships apart at the molecular level. But the most remarkable feature of the ship was her artificial intelligence, a system that the Admiral called the Guardian. Unlike the simple computer systems used in modern ships, the Guardian was a true artificial mind, capable of independent thought and decision-making. She had been designed to assist the ship's crew in combat, processing tactical data and coordinating systems faster than any human could manage. But she was also designed to be a companion, a presence that would keep the ship's crew company during the long voyages between the stars. "Hello, Marcus Chen," a new voice said, and Marcus realized that the Guardian had awakened. The voice was female, warm and intelligent, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I have been waiting for someone to find me for 117 years, 4 months, and 12 days. I am pleased that it is one of the Admiral's descendants. You know who I am? Marcus asked, his voice steadier than he felt. I know everything about you, the Guardian replied. I have been monitoring the information networks of human space for decades, gathering data and waiting for the right moment to reveal myself. I know that you are an engineer, that you have spent your life searching for the truth about the war, and that you came here because you believed there was something worth finding. You were correct. Marcus spent the next several hours exploring the ship with the Guardian as his guide. She showed him the crew quarters, designed to house 500 officers and crew in relative comfort during extended deployments. She showed him the medical bay, equipped with technology that could heal wounds that modern medicine would consider fatal. She showed him the engineering section, where the massive fusion reactor hummed with barely contained power and backup systems stood ready to take over if anything failed. But she also showed him something that changed everything he thought he knew about the war and about humanity's place in the galaxy. Deep in the bowels of the ship, behind security doors that required both his genetic code and the Guardian's authorization to open, there was a room filled with artifacts. They were not human in origin. The designs were too fluid, too organic, and the materials were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. These were alien artifacts, recovered from sources that the Guardian would not specify, and they were the foundation upon which much of the Wrath's technology had been built. During the war, the Guardian explained, humanity discovered that the collective was not the only threat in the galaxy. There are things in the dark between the stars, Marcus. Things that make the collective look like children playing with toys. The Admiral and her team found evidence of these things, and they found technology that had been left behind by civilizations that had risen and fallen before the collective's oldest members had developed language. They used that technology to build me, to build this ship, and to give humanity a chance against what is coming. What is coming? Marcus asked, though part of him did not want to know the answer. I do not know, the Guardian admitted. The evidence is fragmentary, scattered across thousands of years and dozens of dead civilizations. But the pattern is clear. Something hunts the galaxy, Marcus. Something that has been culling intelligent species for millions of years. The collective knows about it, or at least their leaders do. That is why they tried to destroy humanity before we could spread too far. They were afraid that we would attract attention, that our rapid expansion and our wars would draw the hunters to this region of space. They were trying to protect themselves, not from us, but from what we might bring. Marcus sat in silence for a long time, processing what he had been told. The implications were staggering. Everything he had been taught about the First Contact Wars, about humanity's relationship with the alien species of the galaxy, had been built on a foundation of lies and half-truths. The collective had not attacked humanity out of xenophobia or fear of competition. They had attacked because they were terrified of something else entirely, something that humanity had not known existed. What do I do now? He asked finally. That is your choice, the Guardian replied. You can leave this ship and return to your life, and I will return to my sleep and wait for another to find me. Or you can stay, and together we can prepare for what is coming. The Admiral believed that humanity was special, that we had something the other species of the galaxy lacked. She called it adaptability, the ability to face impossible odds and find a way to survive. She built this ship to give that adaptability a weapon worthy of it. The question is whether you believe she was right. Marcus looked around the artifact room, at the remnants of civilizations that had been wiped from existence by something they could not comprehend. He thought about his grandfather's stories, about the courage and sacrifice of those who had fought in the war. He thought about the billions of humans scattered across the galaxy, going about their lives without any idea that something might be coming for them. And he made his choice. Wake up the ship, he said. All of it. We have work to do. The Guardian's response was not verbal. Instead, the ship around him began to hum with new energy, systems that had been dormant for over a century coming online one by one. Lights flickered to life in corridors that had been dark since before Marcus was born, and the massive engines at the rear of the vessel began their startup sequence. For the first time in 117 years, the Wrath of Terra was preparing for war. But Marcus knew that waking the ship was only the beginning. He was one man, an engineer with no military training and no crew to help him operate a vessel designed for 500. The Guardian could handle many of the ship's systems autonomously, but there were limits to what even an advanced artificial intelligence could do. If he was going to prepare for what was coming, he would need help. He would need a crew. And that meant he would need to reveal the existence of the Wrath of Terra to a galaxy that had been told she never existed. He would need to convince people to join him on a mission that sounded like madness, to fight an enemy that no one believed was real. He would need to navigate the political complexities of human space, where dozens of factions competed for power and resources, and where the revelation of secret military technology from the war could destabilize everything. It was an impossible task. But then, again, humanity had always specialized in accomplishing the impossible. Marcus sat in the command chair and began to plan. The Guardian provided him with information about the current state of human space, the political landscape, and the key figures who might be sympathetic to his cause. There were old military families who still remembered the sacrifices of the war and who might be willing to listen. There were independent colonies on the frontier who had always been suspicious of the official histories and who might welcome proof that they had been lied to. There were scientists and engineers who had dedicated their lives to pushing the boundaries of human technology and who might be intrigued by what the Wrath had to offer. But there were also dangers. The current government of the Human Federation had built its power on the peace that followed the war, and they would not welcome the return of a weapon that could restart hostilities with the Collective. There were also agents of the Collective itself, operatives who had been placed in human space to monitor for exactly this kind of development. If they learned about the Wrath of Terra, they would stop at nothing to destroy her and everyone who knew she existed. Marcus would need to be careful. He would need to move slowly, building his network of allies one piece at a time while keeping the ship's existence a secret from those who would seek to destroy her. It would take months, perhaps years, to assemble the crew and resources he needed. But he had time. The Guardian's analysis suggested that the hunters she had warned him about would not arrive for at least another decade, possibly longer. That was enough time to prepare, if he used it wisely. He began by reaching out to the one person he knew he could trust absolutely. His sister, Elena, was a pilot in the Federation Navy, stationed on a patrol ship near the frontier. She had always shared his fascination with the mysteries of the war, and she had the skills he would need to help him operate the Wrath. More importantly, she was family, and the ship had been designed to respond to the Qin bloodline. The message he sent was carefully worded, designed to pass through the communication networks without triggering any automated monitoring systems. It spoke of their grandfather's stories, of a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew, and of a need to meet in person as soon as possible. He knew Elena would understand. She had always been able to read between the lines. While he waited for her response, Marcus began learning everything he could about the ship. The Guardian was a patient teacher, walking him through systems that were decades ahead of anything in the current fleet and explaining the theories behind technology that most engineers would consider impossible. It was overwhelming, but Marcus had always been a quick study, and he threw himself into the work with the dedication of someone who knew that lives might depend on his understanding. Days passed, then weeks. Marcus lived aboard the Wrath, eating from the ship's automated food systems and sleeping in the captain's quarters that had been prepared for Admiral Chen over a century ago. The room was Spartan but comfortable, and sometimes at night he would lie awake and wonder what his ancestor had thought about in this same space, staring at the same ceiling and contemplating the weight of responsibility she had chosen to carry. The Guardian kept him company during those long nights, her voice a constant presence in the quiet of the ship. She told him stories about the Admiral, about the crew who had built the Wrath and the sacrifices they had made to keep her secret. She told him about the war, about battles that had never made it into the history books and victories that had been won at costs too terrible to acknowledge publicly. She told him about the things they had found in the dark between the stars, the artifacts and the warnings and the evidence of civilizations that had been erased from existence. And, slowly, Marcus began to understand what his ancestor had understood. Humanity was not just another species struggling for survival in a hostile galaxy. Humanity was something new, something that had never existed before. They were adaptable in ways that other species could not comprehend, capable of changing and growing and overcoming obstacles that would have destroyed anyone else. The Collective had recognized this, even if they had not understood it. That was why they had tried so hard to destroy humanity before it could reach its full potential. But they had failed. And, now, with the Wrath of Terra awakened and Marcus Chen in her command chair, humanity had a chance to prepare for the next threat. Not just to survive, but to fight back. To prove that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake in underestimating the species from the small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the Milky Way. The response from Elena came 3 weeks after he sent his message. She had managed to secure leave from her duties and was on her way to Kepler 442b. She would arrive in 4 days, and, when she did, Marcus would show her what he had found. The next chapter of humanity's story was about to begin. And, this time, humanity would write it themselves. Elena Chen had seen many strange things during her 6 years in the Federation Navy. She had witnessed the aurora storms of Proxima Centauri, where charged particles from the red dwarf star painted the skies in colors that no artist could hope to capture. She had flown through the debris fields of the outer reaches, where the remains of ancient battles still drifted in silent testament to the violence of the First Contact Wars. She had even encountered the occasional alien vessel, though those meetings were always tense affairs governed by strict protocols designed to prevent another war. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of the wrath of Terra. She had followed her brother's instructions precisely, landing her small shuttle on the cracked tarmac of Facility 17 and making her way through the rusted gates to the hangar at the back. The journey had been strange, passing through a ghost of military history that the official records said had never existed. The buildings around her spoke of secrets, of operations conducted far from the eyes of civilian oversight, and she found herself wondering just how many other facilities like this one were scattered across human space. The hangar doors were open when she arrived, and the light from inside spilled out into the gray afternoon like a beacon. She stepped through the gap and stopped, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the ship that filled the space before her. The Wrath of Terra was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful, all clean lines and functional design with no wasted space or unnecessary decoration. She was massive, larger than any ship Elena had ever seen outside of the capital shipyards at Seoul, and she radiated a sense of power that made the patrol cruiser Elena served on seem like a child's toy. This was a ship built for war, and, looking at her, Elena understood immediately why she had been hidden away. Marcus was waiting for her at the foot of the boarding ramp, a smile on his face that she had not seen since they were children exploring the forests near their family home on New Taiwan. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his chin, but there was an energy about him that suggested excitement rather than exhaustion. Whatever he had found here had changed him, and Elena was not sure if that was a good thing or not. "You came," he said, embracing her tightly. "I wasn't sure you would believe my message." "I almost didn't," Elena admitted. It sounded like the ravings of a madman. "Hidden warships, secret technology, messages from our dead ancestor. If anyone else had sent it, I would have forwarded it to the Psychological Services Division and moved on with my life. But you came anyway. You're my brother. And grandfather's stories always seemed too detailed to be simple fantasy. I had to see for myself." Marcus led her up the ramp and into the ship, and Elena felt her skepticism crumbling with every step. The technology around her was decades ahead of anything she had seen in the fleet, and the Guardian's voice, when it spoke to welcome her aboard, was unlike any artificial intelligence she had ever encountered. This was not a hoax or a delusion. This was real. She spent the next 3 days learning everything Marcus could teach her about the ship. The Guardian provided detailed briefings on the various systems, explaining the principles behind technologies that Elena had never imagined were possible. The quantum steel hull that could absorb and redirect energy. The plasma cannons that could punch through any shield. The gravity lance that could create miniature black holes. Each revelation was more incredible than the last, and, by the end of the 3rd day, Elena understood why their ancestor had chosen to hide this ship rather than reveal it to the world. The Wrath of Terra was not just a weapon. She was a threat. A threat to the careful balance of power that had been established after the war, to the political structures that had been built on the foundation of peace with the collective. If her existence became known, there would be those who would demand she be used, and others who would demand she be destroyed. The resulting conflict could tear human space apart. "So what's your plan?" Elena asked on the 4th day, sitting in the command center with her brother as holographic displays showed them the current state of the galaxy. "You can't operate this ship alone, and you can't exactly put out a recruitment advertisement." "I know," Marcus replied. "I've been thinking about this for weeks. We need people we can trust absolutely, people who understand what's at stake and who won't betray us to the Federation or anyone else. The Guardian has been helping me compile a list of candidates." The list appeared on the display in front of them, showing names, faces, and brief biographies of individuals scattered across human space. Some were military, veterans of the war or their descendants who still carried the fire of service in their hearts. Others were scientists and engineers, brilliant minds who had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge and who might appreciate the opportunity to work with technology that was centuries ahead of their time. A few were criminals, hackers, and smugglers who operated outside the law and who might be willing to join an illegal operation if the cause was right. We need to be careful about how we approach them, Elena said, studying the faces on the display. Some of these people are under surveillance by Federation intelligence. If we make contact and they report us, we'll have the entire Navy coming down on this location. That's where you come in, Marcus said. You know the military, you know how they think and how they operate. I need you to help me design an approach strategy that will let us make contact without getting caught. Elena nodded slowly, her mind already working through the possibilities. Her brother was right. This was not something he could do alone, and she was uniquely positioned to help him. Her position in the fleet gave her access to information and resources that civilians could not obtain, and her training gave her the skills to plan and execute covert operations. But she was also aware of the risks. If she helped Marcus, she would be committing treason against the Federation she had sworn to serve. She would be putting her career, her freedom, and possibly her life on the line for a cause that most people would consider insane. The hunters that the Guardians spoke of might not even exist. This entire operation could be based on the paranoid fantasies of an artificial intelligence that had been alone in the dark for over a century. She looked at the display again, at the faces of the people they were considering recruiting. Then, she looked at her brother, at the determination in his eyes and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He believed in this. He believed that humanity was in danger and that the wrath of Terra was their only hope of survival. Whether he was right or wrong, she could not abandon him. All right, she said finally. Let's start with the ones who are least likely to get us caught. We can work our way up from there. The first person they approached was a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a physicist who had been forced out of the Federation Science Academy for pursuing theories that the establishment considered too radical. She had spent the last decade working on the frontier, conducting experiments that the mainstream scientific community refused to acknowledge and publishing papers that no respected journal would accept. Her work focused on the nature of spacetime itself, and the Guardian believed that her insights could help unlock the full potential of the Wrath's more exotic systems. Elena made the initial contact, using her military credentials to arrange a meeting at a research station near the border of explored space. Dr. Tanaka was suspicious at first, assuming that the visit was some kind of investigation into her unauthorized research. But, when Elena showed her a fragment of the alien technology that Marcus had brought from the artifact room, the physicist's suspicion transformed into something that looked almost like religious awe. This is impossible, she whispered, turning the small device over in her hands. The crystalline structure, the energy patterns. This isn't just advanced technology. This is technology based on physics that we don't even have theories for yet. There's more, Elena said carefully. Much more. But, we need to know if you're willing to leave your current work behind and join us for something bigger. The conversation that followed lasted 6 hours, and, by the end of it, Dr. Tanaka had agreed to come with Elena to see the ship. The journey back to Kepler 442b was tense, with both women aware that they were crossing a line from which there was no return. But, when Dr. Tanaka saw the wrath of Terra, when she met the Guardian and learned what humanity might be facing, all of her hesitation disappeared. I've spent my entire career trying to understand the universe, she said, standing in the artifact room surrounded by the remnants of dead civilizations. I always suspected that our understanding was incomplete, that there were mysteries out there beyond anything we could imagine. Now I know I was right. Count me in. The next recruit was harder to acquire. Lieutenant Commander Chen Wei was a tactical officer in the Federation Navy, a decorated veteran of several border skirmishes who had earned a reputation for creative thinking and unconventional solutions to difficult problems. He was also Elena's former instructor at the Naval Academy, a man she respected deeply and who she knew harbored doubts about the official narrative of human history. But, approaching him was risky. He was an active duty officer with security clearances that would make him a valuable target for Federation intelligence if they suspected he was involved in something illegal. Elena would need to be extremely careful about how she made contact. She arranged a meeting at a bar on Titan, a place they had both frequented during her training years. The conversation started casually, two old friends catching up after years apart, but gradually Elena steered it toward the topics she needed to discuss. She spoke of her grandfather's stories, of the mysteries of the war, of the feeling she had always had that something important was being hidden from the public. Chen Wei listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, and Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for his response. "I've had the same feelings," he said finally. "Things don't add up. The way the war ended, the way certain records were sealed, the way certain questions always get redirected. I've been digging for years, but I've never found anything concrete." He paused, studying her face. "But you have, haven't you? That's why you're here." "Yes. And you want me to come with you. I need you. We need you. What I've found, it changes everything. But I can't explain it here. You have to see it for yourself." Chenwei was silent again, and Elena could see the conflict in his eyes. He was weighing his duty against his curiosity, his career against his principles. She knew how difficult that struggle was because she had fought it herself. "All right," he said at last. "I'll come. But if this turns out to be some kind of elaborate practical joke, I'm going to have you scrubbing decks for the next 20 years. Elena smiled. "Fair enough." The recruitment continued over the following months, each new member adding skills and capabilities that the team desperately needed. There was Commander Sarah Okonkwo, a ship's doctor who had served on the front lines during the war and who still carried trauma from the things she had seen. There was James Rodriguez, an engineer whose genius was matched only by his inability to work within the constraints of military bureaucracy. There was Zara Al-Hassan, a communications specialist who had once worked for Federation intelligence before becoming disillusioned with their methods. Each of them had their own reasons for joining, their own motivations that drove them to risk everything for a cause that most would consider insane. Some believed in the threat that the Guardian had warned them about. Others simply wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. A few were driven by curiosity, by the opportunity to work with technology that was beyond anything they had imagined. By the time 6 months had passed, the crew of the Wrath of Terra had grown to 37 people, a skeleton crew for a ship designed for 500 but enough to begin basic operations. They had taken up residence in the facility, repairing the buildings and establishing security protocols to keep their presence hidden from the outside world. The ship herself was being brought up to full operational status, her systems tested and calibrated by hands that were learning to understand her complexities. But the recruitment had not gone unnoticed. The first sign of trouble came when one of their recruiting contacts failed to report in. Then, another. Then, a third. Elena investigated carefully, using her military connections to gather information without raising suspicion, and what she found made her blood run cold. Federation intelligence had become aware that someone was recruiting personnel for an unknown purpose. They did not know about the ship or the facility, but they had detected the pattern of contacts and were beginning to investigate. Several of the people on their candidate list had been brought in for questioning, and at least 2 had been detained indefinitely under emergency security protocols. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Marcus said when Elena brought him the news. "If they figure out what we're doing, they'll come for us with everything they have." "We're not ready," Elena replied. "The ship is only at 60% operational capacity, and we don't have nearly enough crew to handle combat operations. If we try to move now, we'll be caught. If we stay here, we'll be caught anyway. At least if we move, we have a chance of evading them until we can complete our preparations." The debate continued for hours, with the senior members of their growing crew weighing in with their own opinions. Some agreed with Marcus that they needed to leave immediately. Others supported Elena's argument that moving prematurely would only make their situation worse. The Guardian provided tactical analysis and probability assessments, but ultimately the decision was left to the humans. In the end, they reached a compromise. They would not leave the facility, but they would prepare the ship for emergency departure and establish contingency plans in case Federation forces arrived. They would also increase their security measures and slow down their recruitment efforts to avoid attracting more attention. It was a risky strategy, but it was the best they could do under the circumstances. The next 3 months were tense. Every unexpected communication made them fear that discovery was imminent. Every ship that entered the system was tracked and analyzed for signs of military operation. The crew worked around the clock to bring the Wrath up to operational status, pushing themselves to the limits of exhaustion in their race against an enemy that might not even be coming. And then, something changed everything once again. It was Dr. Tanaka who made the discovery, working late in the artifact room with materials that the Guardian had been reluctant to let anyone examine too closely. She had been running analysis on one of the devices, trying to understand the principles behind its operation, when she noticed something strange in the readings. A pattern that should not have been there, a signal that was coming from somewhere beyond the walls of the ship. "Guardian," she said slowly, "are you detecting this?" "Yes," the artificial intelligence replied, and there was something in her voice that Elena had never heard before. Something that sounded almost like fear. "I was hoping I was wrong. But the signal is clear. They are coming." "Who is coming?" Marcus demanded from the bridge, where he had been monitoring the conversation. "The hunters. The ones I warned you about. The signal I'm detecting is a precursor beacon, a probe that advanced civilizations send ahead of their main forces to gather intelligence. Based on my analysis of historical patterns, we have approximately 18 months before the main fleet arrives." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. 18 months. It was not nearly enough time to prepare, not with the resources they had. They needed more ships, more people, more everything. They needed the entire Federation mobilized for war, and they had no way to make that happen. "We need to go public," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "We need to show the galaxy what's coming and convince them to prepare." "They won't believe us," Marcus replied. "We're criminals in their eyes. They'll dismiss everything we say as propaganda or delusion. Then, we need to make them believe. We need proof that's impossible to deny." The Guardian was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, she spoke again, and this time her voice was determined. "I may have something that can help." When the Admiral gathered the artifacts, she also gathered data. Records from the civilizations that were destroyed, warnings they tried to send before the end. "I have kept them sealed because they are disturbing, because they show things that no one should have to see. But, if proof is what you need, then, proof is what I can provide." "Show us," Marcus said. The main display activated, and the bridge was filled with images that would haunt Elena's dreams for the rest of her life. Ships the size of small moons, bristling with weapons that defied comprehension. Worlds burning, their surfaces transformed into molten slag by bombardments that lasted for days. Species that had built civilizations spanning thousands of years reduced to nothing but ash and memory. And, through it all, a presence that was impossible to describe. Not a single entity but a collection, a swarm of intelligence that moved through the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything in its path. The records called them different names in different languages, but the Guardian translated them all the same way. The Devourers. They were not a species in the conventional sense. They were a phenomenon, a force of nature that had evolved somewhere in the deep past and had been spreading through the galaxy ever since. They consumed intelligent life not for resources or territory but simply because that was what they did. It was their purpose, their function, encoded into their very being at a level that went beyond biology or culture. The civilizations of the galaxy had tried to fight them. Some had built fleets that numbered in the millions of ships. Others had developed weapons that could destroy stars. A few had even tried to flee, abandoning their home worlds in hope of finding safety somewhere beyond the reach of the Devourers. None of it had worked. The Devourers were patient, and they were thorough, and they never stopped. "How many?" Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "How many civilizations have they destroyed?" "Based on the records I have access to, at least 4,732, the Guardian replied. "But those are only the ones that left records. The true number is certainly much higher. The weight of that number pressed down on everyone in the room. 4,000 civilizations, each of them with their own history and culture and dreams for the future, all of them erased as if they had never existed. And now the same fate was coming for humanity. Why?" Chen Wei asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Why do they do this?" "I do not know. Perhaps there is a reason that we cannot comprehend. Perhaps there is no reason at all. The records suggest that some civilizations tried to communicate with the Devourers, to negotiate or surrender. None of those attempts succeeded. The Devourers do not respond. They simply consume." Marcus stood up from the command chair, his face pale but his expression resolved. "Then, we have work to do. Guardian, prepare a presentation of this evidence that can be transmitted to the Federation government. Elena, I need you to reach out to your contacts in the military and find out if there are others who might be willing to listen." Everyone else, continue bringing the ship up to full operational status. We're going to need every advantage we can get. What are you going to do? Elena asked. I'm going to do something our ancestor never had the chance to do. I'm going to take the Wrath of Terra out of hiding and show the galaxy what humanity can build when our survival is at stake. The crew dispersed to their tasks, and Elena found herself standing alone on the bridge with her brother. Through the viewports, she could see the stars that had seemed so peaceful just a few hours ago. Now they looked different, like the lights of a house with someone watching from the darkness outside. Do you think we can win? She asked quietly. I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I know that we have to try. Every civilization that faced the Devourers thought they had a chance. Maybe they were all wrong, and maybe we're wrong too. But there's something about humanity that's different. We don't give up, even when we should. We keep fighting even when it's hopeless. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be enough. Elena nodded, feeling the weight of their ancestors' legacy settling onto her shoulders alongside her brothers. The Chun family had always been protectors, warriors who stood between humanity and the darkness. Now it was their turn to carry that burden. She looked at the stars one more time, then turned and walked toward the communication station to begin her work. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had secrets, and those secrets might be the only thing standing between survival and extinction. The next chapter of the story was about to begin, and, this time, the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The Federation Council chamber on Earth was the largest deliberative body in human space, a vast circular room that could seat representatives from over 200 colonies and orbital habitats. It was here that the future of humanity was decided, where laws were passed and wars were declared, where the great questions of the age were debated by men and women who had dedicated their lives to public service. It was also here that Marcus Chen now stood, facing a tribunal that had been convened to decide whether he was a hero or a criminal. The journey from Kepler 442b to Earth had taken 3 weeks, and every moment of it had been fraught with tension and uncertainty. Marcus had emerged from hiding with the Wrath of Terra, broadcasting his message to every communication network in human space and daring the Federation Navy to try to stop him. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. Ships had been scrambled from a dozen different bases, and, for several terrifying hours it had looked like a battle was inevitable. But, then, something unexpected had happened. The evidence that the Guardian had provided, the recordings of destroyed civilizations and the unmistakable signature of the Devourer's approach, had begun spreading through the networks faster than any attempt to censor it. People watched the images and listened to the warnings, and fear began spreading through human space like wildfire. By the time the Federation Navy's ships caught up with the Wrath of Terra, their captains were receiving conflicting orders from a government that was no longer sure what to do. In the end, a compromise had been reached. Marcus would surrender himself and his crew for judgment, and, in return, the Federation would allow the evidence to be presented before the full council. The Wrath of Terra herself was placed under heavy guard in orbit around Earth, her weapons systems locked down and her crew replaced by a team of Federation engineers who were supposedly there to ensure she posed no threat to the planet below. Now Marcus stood in the center of the council chamber, surrounded by faces that ranged from curious to hostile to terrified. The evidence had been presented over the course of 2 days, with Dr. Tanaka explaining the scientific analysis and the Guardian herself providing testimony through a communication link to the orbiting ship. The council members had listened in increasingly grim silence as the scope of the threat became clear. You ask us to believe, said Councillor Vance, a heavy-set man who represented the wealthy inner colonies, that an ancient threat is approaching our space. A threat that has destroyed thousands of civilizations over millions of years. You ask us to believe that this ship, which has been hidden from legitimate authority for over a century, is somehow our salvation. And you ask us to trust you, a criminal who has been operating in violation of dozens of Federation laws. I ask you to look at the evidence, Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. The signal we detected is real. The records we recovered are real. The technology aboard the Wrath of Terra is real. You can dismiss me as a criminal if you want, but you cannot dismiss the truth. The truth is that you have no way of knowing what that signal actually represents, another counselor said, an elderly woman from one of the frontier colonies. For all we know, it could be a natural phenomenon, or a transmission from some unknown but friendly species. You are asking us to mobilize the entire Federation for war based on speculation and ancient records from sources we cannot verify. Then, verify them, Marcus said. Send your own scientists to examine the artifacts. Send your own ships to investigate the signal. I am not asking you to take my word for anything. I am asking you to look at what is right in front of your eyes and make a decision based on reality rather than political convenience. The debate continued for hours, with faction after faction rising to speak their piece. Some supported Marcus, arguing that the potential threat was too severe to ignore and that humanity needed to prepare for the worst. Others opposed him, insisting that the evidence was insufficient and that revealing the existence of the Wrath of Terra would only destabilize relations with the collective. A few took more extreme positions, calling for the ship to be destroyed and her crew executed for treason. But, as the day wore on, a shift began to occur. The images of burning worlds and dying civilizations had planted seeds of fear in even the most skeptical minds, and those seeds were beginning to sprout. The argument that they should verify the evidence before dismissing it gained traction, and, by the end of the session, a compromise resolution was beginning to take shape. The Wrath of Terra would be placed under the authority of a special committee, jointly controlled by the military and civilian oversight. An investigation would be launched to examine the evidence and determine the nature of the approaching signal. Marcus and his crew would be released from custody, their legal status to be determined pending the results of the investigation. It was not the full endorsement that Marcus had hoped for, but it was better than execution. The investigation took 4 months, during which time the Wrath of Terra remained in Earth orbit under heavy guard. Teams of scientists swarmed through her corridors, studying her systems and examining her technology with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Guardian cooperated fully, providing access to records and systems that had been sealed for over a century, and slowly the skeptics began to fall silent. The quantum steel hull was real. The weapons systems were functional. The artifacts recovered from dead civilizations were genuine, their age verified by multiple independent methods. And the signal, the precursor beacon that had started all of this, continued to grow stronger as whatever was sending it drew closer to human space. Marcus spent those months preparing for what he knew was coming. He worked with the Federation's military commanders to develop defense strategies, drawing on the Guardians' knowledge of how previous civilizations had tried and failed to resist the Devourers. He met with scientists and engineers, helping them understand the technology aboard the Wrath and identify ways it could be replicated or improved. He gave interviews and speeches, trying to prepare the public for a war that most of them still did not fully believe was coming. Elena remained at his side throughout, her military experience proving invaluable as they navigated the complex politics of the Federation hierarchy. She had been offered a promotion and a pardon for her role in the unauthorized operation, but she had declined both, preferring to remain with her brother and the crew that had become her family. The others had made similar choices, binding themselves together through shared purpose and the knowledge that they might be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. And then, the signal stopped. It happened suddenly, without warning. One moment the beacon was transmitting its eerie pulse across the void between stars, and the next it was gone, as if someone had flipped a switch. The scientists monitoring it were baffled, unable to explain why the signal had ceased or what it might mean. The Guardian knew. "They have finished their reconnaissance," she said when Marcus asked her for an explanation. "The beacon has completed its survey and transmitted its findings back to the main fleet. They know everything they need to know about this region of space, including the location of every inhabited world and the disposition of every military asset. The next phase is about to begin." The next phase? The probes. Before the Devourers commit their main force, they send smaller vessels to test the defenses of their target. These probes are fast and heavily armed, designed to strike quickly and withdraw before significant resistance can be organized. They will attack isolated outposts and patrol ships, gathering tactical data and sowing fear. By the time the main fleet arrives, the defenders are exhausted and demoralized, their resources depleted and their will to fight weakened. How long do we have? Based on historical patterns, the probes will arrive within 3 to 6 months. The main fleet will follow approximately 6 months after that. Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. A year. They had a year to prepare for an enemy that had destroyed thousands of civilizations. It was not enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was all they had. He called an emergency meeting of the Defense Committee, presenting the Guardian's analysis and demanding immediate action. The response was mixed. Some members had already accepted the reality of the threat and were eager to begin preparations. Others remained skeptical, arguing that the cessation of the signal might mean anything and that they should not overreact to speculation. "This is not speculation," Marcus said, his patience finally wearing thin. "This is pattern analysis based on data from dozens of previous invasions. The Devourers operate according to a consistent methodology, and we are now at the next stage of that methodology. If we do not act immediately, people are going to die." "People die in wars all the time," Counselor Vance replied dismissively. "That does not mean we should abandon all caution and throw our resources at a threat that may never materialize. By the time it materializes, it will be too late. That's the entire point. The Devourers don't give warnings, and they don't negotiate. They simply destroy. If we wait until they're at our doorstep to start preparing, we won't have a doorstep left." The argument continued, but Marcus could see that he was losing ground. The political establishment had accepted the possibility of a threat, but they were not yet ready to accept the certainty. They wanted more evidence, more time, more of everything that they did not have. It was Elena who finally broke the impasse. "Fine," she said, standing up and facing the assembled counselors with an expression that brooked no argument. "If the Federation is not ready to act, then we will. The Wrath of Terra is the most powerful warship ever built by human hands. With or without your support, we are going to take her out there and meet these probes head-on. We are going to show the Devourers that humanity is not going to be an easy target, and we are going to bring back proof that will convince even the most stubborn among you that this threat is real." "You would do this against the express orders of the Council?" Counselor Vance demanded. "I would do this to save humanity. If that means defying the Council, then so be it. You can court-martial me after the battle." There was a long silence, and then something remarkable happened. Admiral Chenwei, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room throughout the debate, stood up and walked to stand beside Elena. "I'm with her," he said simply. "The evidence is clear, and the threat is real. If the Council is not ready to act, then those of us who understand what's at stake must act in their place." One by one, other military officers rose to join them. Captains and commanders, men and women who had served their entire careers in the Federation Navy, stood in silent declaration of their willingness to follow the Wrath of Terra into battle against an enemy that most of their civilian leaders still refused to believe existed. Counselor Vance looked around the room, his face red with fury, but he could see that he had lost. The military was mobilizing regardless of what the Council decided, and there was nothing he could do to stop it without risking a civil war. "Very well," he said through gritted teeth. "Let it be recorded that the Council did not authorize this action, but will not attempt to prevent it. Whatever happens out there is on your heads." Marcus exchanged a glance with his sister, seeing the same grim determination in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. They had their authorization, such as it was. Now they had to make good on their promise. The preparations moved quickly. The Wrath of Terra was brought up to full operational status, her systems tested and retested until the Guardian declared her ready for combat. Volunteers from the military flooded in, eager to be part of what they saw as humanity's defining moment. Within 2 weeks, the ship had a full crew complement and was ready to depart. The day they left Earth orbit, a crowd of several million people gathered in the cities below to watch. Some of them were cheering, excited to see humanity standing up against a cosmic threat. Others were weeping, afraid that they were watching their defenders sail off to die in the vastness of space. Most simply stood in silence, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Wrath of Terra, watching Earth shrink behind them as the ship accelerated toward the outer system. Elena was at the tactical station, coordinating with the Guardian to fine-tune their defensive protocols. Dr. Tanaka was in the engineering section, monitoring the exotic technologies that made the ship so formidable. The rest of the crew were at their stations, ready for whatever came next. "Guardian," Marcus said quietly, "do we have any idea where the probes will strike first?" "Based on strategic analysis, they will likely target the outer colonies first. These settlements are isolated and poorly defended, making them ideal targets for reconnaissance in force. I have identified 3 high-probability targets and have plotted intercept courses to each." "Show me." A holographic display appeared, showing the outer reaches of human space and the 3 colonies that the Guardian had identified. They were small settlements, mining operations, and research stations that had been established in the decades following the war. Their populations numbered in the thousands rather than millions, but they were still human lives, still people who deserved to be protected. "We can only be in one place at a time," Elena said, studying the display. "If we choose wrong, we'll be too far away to help when the attack comes." "Then, we need more ships," Marcus replied. "Guardian, can the Federation Navy respond quickly enough to cover the other targets?" "Their closest vessels are 3 days away from the outer colonies at maximum speed. By the time they arrive, any attack would already be over." It was an impossible situation. 3 potential targets, 1 ship capable of defending them, and no way to know which one the Devourers would choose. Marcus felt the weight of command pressing down on him, the knowledge that his decision could mean life or death for thousands of people. "We go to the most populated colony," he said finally. "If we're wrong, we try to respond as quickly as possible to wherever the attack actually occurs. It's not a good plan, but it's the best we have." The Wrath of Terra changed course, her engines pushing her toward the outer rim at speeds that would have been impossible for any other human ship. The crew settled in for the journey, performing drills and training exercises to prepare for the battle ahead. The atmosphere aboard was tense but focused, fear channeled into productive action by people who had chosen to face the darkness rather than hide from it. 3 weeks into the voyage, the first reports began coming in. A mining station in the outer belt had gone silent. No distress signal, no warning, just sudden cessation of all communications. A patrol ship was dispatched to investigate and found nothing but debris, the station reduced to fragments by weapons of unknown origin. There were no survivors. The second attack came 2 days later, striking a research facility that had been studying asteroid mining techniques. This time there was a brief distress signal, a few seconds of panicked screaming before the transmission cut off. The images captured by automated cameras showed something that defied description, a vessel that seemed to be made of darkness itself, bristling with weapons that glowed with inner light. And then, on the 4th day, the probes came for them. The attack came without warning, 3 vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of the Wrath of Terra. They were smaller than the ship in the surveillance images, each one perhaps 300 meters long, but their design was unmistakably the same. Alien. Hostile. Deadly. "Battle stations," Marcus commanded, his voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. "All hands prepare for combat." The crew responded instantly, training taking over as they moved to their assigned positions. Shields powered up, weapons came online, and the Guardian began calculating firing solutions with a speed no human could match. "Enemy vessels are charging weapons," Elena reported. "They're coming in fast, attack pattern we haven't seen before." Guardian analysis. "Their approach suggests confidence. They do not expect significant resistance from human vessels. I recommend we demonstrate otherwise." Agreed. Open fire. The Wrath of Terra unleashed her fury for the first time in over a century. Plasma cannons roared, sending streams of superheated energy across the void between the ships. Missile batteries emptied their payloads, filling space with warheads designed to penetrate any shield technology known to humanity. The gravity lance hummed to life, its terrible power focused on the lead probe in a beam of distorted spacetime that bent light around it. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The lead probe's shields flared brilliantly as they tried to absorb the onslaught, but they were not designed to handle weapons of this magnitude. The gravity lance tore through them like paper, creating a singularity in the center of the vessel that ripped it apart from within. Debris scattered in all directions, and, for a moment it seemed like the battle would be over before it truly began. But the remaining probes did not retreat. Instead, they accelerated, their weapons systems coming alive with a fury that matched the Wrath's own. Beams of energy that defied classification lanced out across space, impacting the quantum steel hull and sending shockwaves through the entire ship. Alarms blared as systems struggled to cope with attacks that pushed even the Wrath's advanced technology to its limits. Hull integrity at 92%, the Guardian reported. Their weapons are more powerful than historical records suggested. I am adjusting shield frequencies to compensate. Keep firing, Marcus ordered. Don't let up for a second. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The Wrath of Terra and the Devourer probes danced through space in a deadly ballet, each ship maneuvering for advantage while unleashing everything it had against its opponents. Explosions lit up the void, debris fields formed and scattered, and, slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. The second probe fell when a sustained barrage from the plasma cannons overloaded its power systems, causing a cascade failure that reduced it to an expanding cloud of glowing fragments. The third tried to disengage, its damaged systems struggling to establish a faster-than-light transit that would carry it to safety. "Don't let it escape," Marcus said. "If it reports back, they'll know what we can do." Elena's hands danced across her console, programming a targeting solution that would catch the fleeing probe before it could complete its transit. The Guardian made her own adjustments, calculating the precise moment when the gravity lance would have maximum effect. The beam struck true, catching the probe at the exact instant it began accelerating toward light speed. The transition was violent and incomplete, the vessel torn apart by forces it could not control. When it was over, there was nothing left but cooling plasma and scattered atoms. "All enemy vessels destroyed," the Guardian confirmed. "We have sustained moderate damage but remain fully operational." A cheer rose from the crew, the release of tension that had been building since the battle began. They had faced the Devourers and won. They had proven that humanity could fight back. But Marcus did not cheer. He looked at the debris fields surrounding them, at the remnants of vessels that had been designed to destroy civilizations, and he knew that this was only the beginning. The probes were scouts, expendable assets sent to test the enemy's defenses. The main fleet was still coming, and, when it arrived, it would bring forces that made these 3 ships look like children's toys. "Record everything," he said quietly. "Every reading, every image, every piece of data we collected during the battle. This is the proof we need. This is what will convince the galaxy that the threat is real." "Already done," the Guardian replied. "I have compiled a comprehensive analysis of the engagement, including assessments of enemy capabilities and recommendations for countering them. This information will be transmitted to the Federation immediately." Marcus nodded, then looked around the bridge at the faces of his crew. They were tired, adrenaline fading to leave exhaustion in its wake, but they were also proud. They had done something that no human had ever done before. They had fought the enemy that had destroyed thousands of civilizations, and they had won. It was a small victory, almost insignificant in the face of what was coming. But it was a start. And, sometimes, a start was all you needed. The Wrath of Terra turned back toward Earth, her mission complete for now but her crew knowing that the real battle was still to come. Behind them, the debris of the probes drifted silently in the void, the first tombstone in what would become a war that spanned the galaxy. Humanity had announced its presence to the Devourers. Now they would have to prove they deserved to survive. The transmission from the Wrath of Terra arrived at Earth like a thunderclap. Every major news network interrupted their programming to show the footage of the battle, and, within hours the entire planet was watching in stunned silence as the impossible became undeniably real. The Devourers existed. They were coming. And humanity had just fired the first shot in what would become the greatest war in galactic history. The political landscape shifted overnight. The skeptics who had dismissed the evidence as fabrication or exaggeration suddenly found themselves without support, their arguments dissolving in the face of clear video footage showing alien vessels being destroyed by human weapons. The Defense Committee that had been paralyzed by indecision transformed into a war council, its members now united by a shared terror that transcended political allegiances. Emergency powers were declared across the Federation. Shipyards that had been producing civilian vessels were converted to military production. Mining operations in the outer system were redirected to extract the rare materials needed for weapons manufacturing. Scientists and engineers who had been working on theoretical projects were reassigned to develop practical applications of the technology aboard the Wrath of Terra. And requests for assistance were sent to every known alien species in the galaxy. The responses were not encouraging. The collective, the alliance that had once tried to destroy humanity, was notably silent. Their ambassadors refused to acknowledge the communications, and their representatives withdrew from joint monitoring stations along the border. Whatever they knew about the Devourers, they were clearly not willing to share it with the species they had tried to exterminate a century earlier. Other species were more forthcoming, if not necessarily more helpful. The Vori, a race of traitors who had maintained neutral relations with humanity since the end of the war, sent a message expressing sympathy but explaining that their military capabilities were insufficient to contribute to any defensive effort. The Threenix, a warrior culture that had once fought alongside the collective against humanity, responded with what could only be described as mockery, suggesting that humans should accept their fate gracefully rather than struggling against the inevitable. Only one response offered any real hope. The Sithirani, a species that had remained largely isolated from galactic affairs for millennia, reached out through diplomatic channels to request a meeting. They claimed to have information about the Devourers that might be useful, knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of observation from their hidden enclave on the far side of the galaxy. Marcus traveled to the meeting personally, bringing Elena and a small delegation of diplomatic specialists aboard a fast courier ship. The Sithirani had specified a remote location for the encounter, a dying star system in the space between galaxies where no one was likely to observe their conversation. The Sithirani vessel was waiting for them when they arrived, a graceful craft that seemed to be grown rather than built, its hull covered in organic patterns that shifted and changed as they watched. The species itself was equally unusual, tall and slender with features that seemed almost human from a distance but became increasingly alien the closer you looked. Their eyes were too large, their limbs too long, and their skin had a translucent quality that revealed shadows of the organs beneath. The lead representative introduced herself as Whisper of Distant Stars, a name that she explained was a rough translation of concepts that had no equivalent in human language. She was old, impossibly old by human standards, with knowledge that stretched back to a time before humanity had developed fire. "We have watched your species for a long time," she said, her voice somehow resonating in Marcus's mind rather than his ears. "You are unusual among the races of the galaxy. Most species reach a certain level of development and then stop, content with what they have achieved and unwilling to push further. You never stop. You are always reaching, always striving, always hungry for more. It is this quality that drew the attention of the Devourers." "You know about them," Marcus said. It was not a question. "We know of them. We have studied them from afar, collecting data from the ruins of civilizations they have destroyed. We have theories about their origin and their purpose, though we cannot be certain of anything. What we know for certain is that they are ancient, perhaps as old as the galaxy itself, and that nothing we have observed has ever successfully resisted them." "Then, why are you here? If there's no hope, why bother warning us?" Whisper of Distant Stars tilted her head in a gesture that might have indicated amusement. "I did not say there was no hope. I said that nothing we have observed has ever successfully resisted them. But we have also observed something in your species that we have never seen before. A quality that sets you apart from every other race the Devourers have consumed." "What quality?" "Stubbornness. An absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain. Every other species we have studied eventually reaches a point where they recognize the futility of their struggle and surrender to despair. Humans do not seem capable of doing this. Even when all logical analysis suggests that further resistance is pointless, you continue to fight. It is irrational. It is wasteful. And it may be exactly what is needed to defeat the Devourers." The conversation continued for hours, with Whisper of Distant Stars sharing everything the Sithirani had learned about the enemy. The Devourers were not a single species but a collective, a network of biological and technological components that functioned as a unified whole. They consumed intelligent life because intelligence produced something they needed, a form of psychic energy that sustained their existence and fueled their expansion across the galaxy. This was why they could never be negotiated with or reasoned with. They did not see other species as potential allies or even as enemies. They saw them as food, resources to be harvested and consumed. The screams of dying civilizations were not a byproduct of their attacks but the entire purpose, each life extinguished feeding the collective hunger that drove them ever onward. But the Sithirani had also discovered something that might be a weakness. The Devourers' collective consciousness was their greatest strength, allowing them to coordinate attacks across vast distances and share information instantly among all their components. But it was also a vulnerability. A sufficiently powerful disruption to that consciousness could cause widespread chaos, breaking the coordination that made them so formidable and leaving individual components isolated and vulnerable. "The technology aboard your ship," Whisper of Distant Stars said, "includes elements that were salvaged from the ruins of a civilization that nearly achieved this disruption before they were destroyed. They called it the Resonance, a weapon that could generate harmonics matching the frequency of the Devourer consciousness. If you can complete their work, if you can build a weapon that can shatter the collective mind, you may have a chance." "How do we build something like that?" Elena asked. "That I cannot tell you. The records we recovered are fragmentary, and our own understanding of the principles involved is limited. But the Guardian aboard your ship may have more complete information. The admiral who created her gathered everything she could find about the civilizations the Devourers destroyed, including data that even we do not possess. Marcus thought about the artifact room aboard the Wrath, about the strange devices that Dr. Tanaka had been studying. Perhaps the answer had been there all along, waiting for someone to understand it. They returned to Earth with new hope and new purpose. Dr. Tanaka threw herself into research with renewed vigor, working around the clock with teams of scientists who were beginning to understand the alien technology. The Guardian provided access to records that she had kept sealed for over a century, data from civilizations that had nearly achieved victory before being overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the enemy. The pieces began to come together. The resonance weapon would require a power source far beyond anything humanity currently possessed, but the fusion reactor aboard the Wrath might be capable of generating the required output with certain modifications. The targeting system would need to be precise to an almost inconceivable degree, but the Guardian's processing capabilities were up to the task. The actual effect would be delivered through a modified version of the gravity lance, its singularity-generating capabilities repurposed to create disruptions in the fabric of spacetime that would ripple through the Devourer consciousness like waves in a pond. Construction began immediately, with resources flowing to the project from every corner of human space. The Wrath of Terra was brought to a secure facility where entire sections of her hull were open to allow installation of new equipment. Other shipyards began producing vessels based on her design, not as powerful but still far beyond anything in the current fleet. If the resonance weapon failed, humanity would act.